Sign here, Mr. Hayes, and your daughter lives. Walk away and watch her die waiting for a surgery you'll never afford. The words hung in the air between them like a sentence passed down from some cruel god. Carter Hayes stood before the glass desk on the 68th floor of a Los Angeles high-rise, his calloused fingers trembling above a document that would sell 3 years of his life to the coldest woman in California. The pen felt heavy. Everything felt heavy. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city sprawling beneath a smog-choked sunset, indifferent to the bargain being struck in this temperature-controlled office, where the air smelled faintly of jasmine and money. Diana Sterling watched him with eyes the color of winter storms, her expression clinical. She'd built an empire on the ability to assess value, to calculate risk, to close deals that left other CEOs reeling. This man with dirt under his fingernails and a suit borrowed from a dead relative was just another transaction. Necessary, temporary, completely under her control. Carter thought of Isla, 6 years old, brown curls that never stayed in the ponytail he attempted each morning, a smile missing 2 front teeth, a heart with a hole in it slowly failing with every beat. 3 weeks ago, a doctor had looked at him with practiced sympathy and explained that without surgery, his daughter had maybe 6 months. The wait list stretched 18 months into a future Isla wouldn't see. The cost without insurance might as well have been the moon. He signed. Diana's lips curved upward for the first time since he'd entered her domain, and Carter understood he'd just made a deal with someone who didn't know how to smile, only how to win. 3 weeks earlier, Carter had been a different version of desperate. The kind that wakes you at 3 in the morning, sends you searching through couch cushions for quarters, makes you sell the television your late wife had bought for your first anniversary. The apartment in Van Nuys felt smaller every day, shrinking around the medical bills that accumulated on the kitchen table like accusations rendered in Times New Roman 12-point font. Total due $187,342.67. The specificity of it mocked him. Morrison's handyman services kept him employed during daylight hours, fixing leaky faucets and busted garage doors for people who lived in houses with yards. Nights belonged to the warehouse where Amazon paid $11 an hour to move boxes that contained things he'd never be able to afford. Sleep happened in the cracks between shifts in the truck, between jobs, sometimes sitting upright at the kitchen table, while Isla colored pictures at his elbow. That particular morning, Grace Hartwell had arrived at 6:30, as she had every morning for 2 years, letting herself in with the key Carter had given her after Sarah died. Grace was 58, a widow who'd raised 3 children and buried one who understood loss in ways that didn't require explanation. She charged nothing because Carter couldn't pay anything, accepting only gratitude and the occasional shared meal. Isla sat at the table working through multiplication tables that looked like ancient hieroglyphics to a girl who'd missed 37 days of school since September. Her breathing carried a faint rasp, barely noticeable unless you knew to listen for it. Carter knew. He'd been listening for 18 months, ever since the first time she'd turned blue, climbing the stairs to their second-floor unit. Grace touched his shoulder as he gathered his tools. The doctors called it a ventricular septal defect. Carter called it a hole that was stealing his daughter one labored breath at a time. The cardiologist had shown him images that meant nothing to him, pointing at shadows and explaining in terms meant to be gentle, but landing like blows. Without surgical repair, the heart would eventually give out. With surgery, Isla could have a normal life. The gap between those two futures came down to money. Carter didn't have insurance he couldn't afford, and a system that measured the value of a child's life in copays and deductibles. He'd called 13 hospitals, sent emails to 17 charitable foundations, applied for medical credit cards that came back denied, his credit score shattered by previous medical bills from Sarah's final 6 months. The cancer had taken her efficiently, brutally, leaving behind a 2-year-old who asked when mommy was coming home, and a husband who'd learned that love and money were both finite resources. Diana Sterling's world existed in a different stratosphere entirely. The Sterling Enterprises headquarters rose 73 floors above downtown Los Angeles, all glass and steel geometry, designed by an architect whose name appeared in textbooks. The building's shadow fell across 3 city blocks. The company itself cast a longer shadow, still its tentacles reaching into aerospace, defense, commercial real estate, and a dozen other sectors that generated the kind of wealth that bent reality. The boardroom on the 72nd floor held 20 chairs around an oval table cut from a single piece of mahogany that had cost more than most people earned in a year. 19 of those chairs were occupied by men and women whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. The 20th belonged to Diana, positioned at the head like a queen facing her court. Marcus Ashford sat 3 seats to her right, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. At 38, he'd cultivated the appearance of old money. Despite growing up in Section 8, housing had learned to speak the language of wealth fluently enough to convince people he'd been born to it. 3 years ago, Diana had almost loved him. For 8 months, she'd let herself believe in his charm, his attention, his whispered promises in hotel rooms that cost $5,000 a night. Then she discovered the offshore accounts, the stolen contracts, the competitors who somehow always seemed to know Sterling's next move. Marcus had smiled when she confronted him, that same sharp smile he wore now, and told her she'd regret choosing the company over him. Some promises men kept. Patricia Walsh, the only board member who'd voted against every attempt to undermine Diana's leadership, cleared her throat. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression carrying the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already won. The quarterly earnings were strong. Employee retention was at a 5-year high. The expansion into renewable energy had positioned Sterling ahead of every competitor. None of it mattered to men who believed a woman's marital status reflected her capacity for leadership. Diana kept her face neutral, a mask she'd perfected over 15 years of fighting for respect in rooms full of men who called her sweetheart while plotting her removal. Her father had died 13 months ago, leaving her a company and a legacy she'd spent her entire adult life preparing to inherit. He'd also left her alone in a house too big for one person, with a silence that sometimes screamed. After the meeting, she sat in her office and wondered what her mother would think. Cancer had taken her when Diana was 12, leaving behind a daughter who'd learned to build walls because the alternative was bleeding out in front of people who saw vulnerability as opportunity. The parking lot of Children's Hospital stretched across 2 city blocks, a vast expanse of asphalt marked with painted lines in the accumulated grief of parents facing impossible choices. Diana's Bentley sat in visitor parking tinted windows, creating a cocoon of privacy. She hadn't intended to stop here. Her driver had simply pulled over when she'd spotted something that made her speak for the first time in 20 minutes. A man carrying a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 6, her small body limp against his chest, her face buried in his shoulder. The man's truck sat 3 spaces away, rust visible even from a distance, the rear bumper held on with duct tape. He moved with the careful gait of someone carrying something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Diana lowered the window, heard fragments of conversation, the girl's voice muffled. Something about monsters under the bed. The man's response rough with emotion, but steady in a way that suggested practice. Monsters weren't real. Daddy had checked. Daddy would always check. They reached the truck. The man opened the door, with his hips settled the girl into a booster seat that had seen better years, buckled her in with movements so gentle, Diana felt something crack in her chest. Then he closed the door, walked around to the driver's side and stopped. His shoulders shook. He pressed his forehead against the window, and Diana realized he was crying in a way that suggested he'd held it in too long, that the dam had finally broken. She watched him compose himself, watched him wipe his face with the heel of his hand, watched him climb into the truck and drive away, and something in her recognized something in him. Desperation, determination, the kind of love that would burn the world down if it meant saving one person. Diana reached for her phone and called the investigator she kept on retainer for situations requiring discretion. The report arrived 3 days later. Carter Hayes, 34 years old widower. Wife Sarah had died 4 years prior, ovarian cancer, leaving behind a daughter named Isla, who'd been 2 at the time. Hayes worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Credit score in the basement entirely due to medical debt from his wife's final months. No criminal record. No vices beyond the occasional beer purchased with pocket change. Neighbors described him as quiet, hardworking, devoted to his daughter in ways that made single mothers jealous. The investigator had included surveillance photos. Hayes at the grocery store choosing dented cans because they were discounted. Hayes at a laundromat folding tiny clothes while Isla slept on a plastic chair. Hayes at Children's Hospital holding his daughter's hand while doctors delivered news that made his expression crumble. The final page contained the investigator's assessment. Subject displays no indicators of dishonesty, manipulation, or opportunism. Primary motivation appears to be child's welfare above all other considerations. Vulnerability, financial desperation, secondary to daughter's medical needs. Recommendation exploitable for purposes requiring authentic desperation. Diana read the report twice, then locked it in her desk drawer. She spent 3 weeks considering options, running scenarios, calculating probabilities. The board wanted a husband. Fine. She'd give them a husband so utterly removed from their world that he posed zero threat while simultaneously serving as perfect armor. A man who needed something only she could provide. A man who'd sign anything, agree to anything to save his daughter. A man who wouldn't expect love because he'd already had it and lost it. She found Carter in the parking lot of his apartment complex on a Thursday evening, approaching him as he unloaded groceries from his truck. Up close, he looked younger than his file suggested, but more worn, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight no one should carry alone. Her card was simple, cream stock embossed lettering. Diana Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Enterprises. His confusion was immediate visible. People in her world didn't exist in his, and the collision of those spheres made no sense. Diana kept her voice level, professional. She had a proposition that could save his daughter. No strings. Well, one string, but she'd explain everything if he'd give her 30 minutes. What did he have to lose? Carter looked at the card at the groceries wilting in bags on his truck bed. Then he named a coffee shop 3 blocks away and said she had until his daughter's bedtime. The office felt different the second time Carter entered it. Or maybe he felt different, having crossed some threshold that separated who he'd been from who he was about to become. Diana sat behind her desk wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of his rent, her expression giving away nothing. The contract was 52 pages. Carter had never seen a legal document that long for something that should have been simple. Marriage, 3 years, in exchange for Isla's complete medical care enrollment at Westbrook Academy in a trust fund of $2 million accessible when she turned 18, plus $12,000 a month for his personal expenses deposited into an account Diana's lawyers would establish. The terms were explicit: separate bedrooms, no physical intimacy, no romantic entanglement. They would appear together at public functions no less than twice monthly, would maintain the illusion of a devoted couple for cameras and witnesses. In private, they were strangers who shared an address. Non-disclosure agreements were ironclad. If Carter breathed a word of the arrangement to anyone, the penalties would bankrupt him for life. If Diana violated her end, he'd receive $5 million in damages. 3 years. Then a quiet divorce. Clean, professional, mutually beneficial. Carter read every word twice while Diana worked on her laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard with mechanical precision. The jasmine scent was stronger today, or maybe he was just noticing it more. The office was silent except for the soft click of keys and the sound of his daughter's life being weighed against his freedom. His throat felt tight. He forced the words out anyway. This covered Isla's surgery, her recovery, future complications if they arose. But what happened if he met someone during those 3 years? What if he fell in love? Diana's fingers paused. She looked up and something flickered in her expression, too quickly to name. Then you wait 3 years, as will I. Neither of us is in us for romance. You need money, I need armor. It's a transaction. Nothing more. The words should have stung. Instead, they clarified something. This wasn't betraying Sarah's memory. This was survival. This was a father doing whatever it took to save his daughter, which was exactly what Sarah would have wanted, expected, demanded. But Carter had conditions too. He pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket, words he'd scribbled at 3 in the morning while Isla slept and doubt tried to strangle him. Diana's eyebrow raised a gesture that might have been surprise or might have been irritation. She read his handwritten terms. Her expression didn't change, but her posture shifted slightly, a loosening that suggested he'd surprised her. Few people manage that. His requirements were simple. Diana would treat Isla with respect, would never use her as a prop, would never make her feel unwanted. Diana would treat Carter like a human being, not furniture. Please and thank you weren't negotiable. If Diana ever talked down to him in front of his daughter, he'd walk. Contract voided. He didn't care about the money, the school, any of it. Isla's emotional well-being trumped everything. The silence stretched longer than comfortable. Diana set down the paper, picked up a pen, and signed her name across the bottom of his conditions with a flourish that looked almost defiant. Then she slid the document back across the desk. Welcome to the family, Mr. Hayes. The courthouse wedding happened 5 days later, scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in a building that smelled of bureaucracy and other people's divorce proceedings. No guests, no flowers, no music, just a judge who'd performed this ceremony so many times the words had lost all meaning, and two lawyers who served as witnesses while checking their phones. Carter wore the same suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, dry cleaned twice but still carrying memories in the fabric. Diana wore cream silk that probably cost what his truck was worth, her hair pulled back severely, her makeup flawless. Isla wore a yellow dress covered in tiny sunflowers because she'd picked it out herself, and Carter couldn't say no to her smile, even if it cracked his heart. The judge read from a script. Do you, Diana Sterling, take this man? Do you, Carter Hayes, take this woman? The words felt hollow theatrical, a performance for an audience of strangers who didn't care about the answer. You may kiss the bride. The phrase hung between them like a test neither had studied for. The contract explicitly forbade physical intimacy, but a wedding without a kiss would raise questions. Diana leaned forward, her movements measured and pressed her lips against his cheek. Brief, cool, closing a door rather than opening one. The judge pronounced them married. The lawyers collected their fees. Isla clapped her small hands, making a sound like bird wings. And just like that, Carter Hayes became someone else's property for the next 3 years. The Sterling mansion rose from the Pacific Palisades like something from a film about people who'd never worried about money. 12,000 square feet of architectural achievement, all clean lines and walls of glass overlooking the ocean. 47 rooms, most of which Diana had never entered. A pool that sparkled in the California sun. Gardens maintained by staff who arrived at dawn and disappeared before she returned from work. Carter's truck looked obscene in the circular driveway surrounded by vehicles that cost more than most houses. A groundskeeper's Mercedes, a housekeeper's Lexus, Diana's Bentley, and his rusted Ford F-150 held together by prayers and desperation. Beatrice Thornton met them at the entrance. 62 years old, she'd worked for the Sterling family since Diana was 16, had watched a lonely girl become a lonelier woman. She ran the household with military precision, maintained standards that would make drill sergeants weep, and possessed the only opinion Diana actually valued. Isla's eyes went wide as they stepped into the foyer. The ceiling soared 2 stories overhead. Marble floors stretched toward hallways that led to rooms upon rooms upon rooms. A chandelier hung from the ceiling like captured starlight, each crystal probably worth more than everything Carter owned. Isla's whisper carried in the cavernous space. It's bigger than the park. Diana had prepared the room herself, spending 3 nights choosing paint colors and furniture while telling herself it was just practicality. The child would be living here. The child should have something appropriate. The fact that she'd researched Isla's favorite color, had ordered purple bedding and purple curtains and purple everything meant nothing. Just attention to detail. Just controlling the variables. The bedroom sat at the end of the east wing, far enough from Diana's suite to maintain distance, but close enough to Carter's room that Isla wouldn't feel abandoned. Diana pushed open the door, and Isla's gasp was worth every sleepless hour. Purple walls, a canopy bed with gauze curtains that billowed in the breeze from an open window, shelves filled with books and toys still wrapped in plastic, a window seat overlooking the garden buried under cushions in every shade of lavender imaginable. Isla stood frozen in the doorway, her small body trembling. Carter knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The answer came in a whisper. "It's purple. Everything's purple. Like Mommy's eyes." Carter's face did something complicated. Diana felt the floor tilt slightly, understanding blooming like poison. Sarah's eyes hadn't been purple, but Isla had decided they had needed them to be had chosen her favorite color as the color of heaven. Isla turned to Diana with an expression too solemn for 6 years old. "Did you know about Mommy's eyes?" Diana's throat closed. She'd researched purple as Isla's favorite color. She hadn't known why, hadn't understood the weight behind that preference. She forced words past the knot in her chest. "I knew purple was your favorite, Elle. I hoped the room would make you feel at home." Isla studied her for a long moment, then crossed the space between them and wrapped small arms around Diana's legs. Thank you for making it pretty, for holding Daddy's hand, for everything. Diana's hands hovered above Isla's shoulders, uncertain where to land, unsure if she had permission to touch. Then something inside her broke loose, and she knelt, gathered the child into an embrace that felt foreign and necessary. The hug was awkward, unpracticed, but it was real. You're welcome, Isla. Welcome home. The first week established rhythms that felt wrong in their wrongness. Diana left for the office at 6 each morning and returned after 10 each night, sometimes not at all. Carter felt like a ghost haunting, rooms too large for haunting, trying to navigate a space where everything cost more than his life. Isla started at Westbrook Academy, where her classmates arrived in chauffeur-driven cars and discussed vacation homes in Aspen. The other children asked questions Isla didn't know how to answer. Your new mom is Diana Sterling. The billionaire, why does she never pick you up from school? Do you have your own swimming pool? Have you met any famous people? Isla came home, confused, overwhelmed, trying to reconcile the massive house with the absent woman who'd signed papers, making her Carter's wife. That evening, she asked Carter a question that landed like a fist. Is she my mom now? Or is she just the lady who helps us? Carter pulled his daughter onto his lap, felt her heartbeat against his chest, that irregular rhythm that doctors were supposed to fix. Diana isn't your mom, sweetheart. Your mom is always your mom, even in heaven. Diana is someone helping us, someone who cares about you. The lie tasted bitter. He wasn't sure Diana cared about anything beyond quarterly earnings and board meetings. That night, Beatrice had prepared dinner, despite Carter's protest that he could handle cooking. The housekeeper simply raised an eyebrow and pointed out that the last time Carter had attempted to use the 8-burner professional range, he'd nearly set off the fire suppression system, making grilled cheese. Point taken. Diana appeared in the dining room doorway at 7:15, still in her work clothes, her expression suggesting she'd forgotten other humans existed in her house. Beatrice had set 3 places. Diana stared at the table as if it might bite her. Carter kept his voice neutral. We were about to eat. You're welcome to join us. Diana hesitated, caught between fleeing back to her office and the social obligation of acknowledging her new family's existence. She sat her movements stiff and accepted the plate Beatrice offered, with a nod that wasn't quite gratitude. Isla launched into a story about her first day at school, the words tumbling over each other. She'd learned about butterflies, how caterpillars dissolved into soup inside their cocoons and rebuilt themselves into something with wings. Miss Patterson said everything turns to liquid and then reorganizes. Did Diana know that? Did she think it hurt to become soup? Diana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I think transformation is always difficult, but maybe it's worth it if what you become is beautiful. The words hung in the air, and Carter wondered if she was talking about butterflies or something else entirely. Isla pivoted to her next subject with the attention span of a 6-year-old. She wanted to be a butterfly when she grew up, a purple one with sparkles. Diana pointed out that butterflies didn't have sparkles. Isla disagreed with the confidence of childhood certainty. They should have sparkles. And Diana should tell someone to make it happen because Diana was in charge of everything. Daddy said so. Diana's expression did something that might have been amusement if she'd remembered how that worked. I'll take it under advisement. The dinner ended with Isla satisfied and Diana retreating to her office. Carter cleaned the dishes. Beatrice's protest notwithstanding, and tried not to think about the woman working 3 floors above him, who'd paid for his daughter's life, but couldn't sit through a meal without looking like she was enduring torture. 3 weeks into the arrangement, the cracks started showing. Carter woke at 2 in the morning to Isla standing beside his bed, her small hand shaking his shoulder. The quiet lady is sick. She's sleeping on the couch in the glass room and making scary sounds. The glass room was Diana's study, accessible via a spiral staircase that Carter had been explicitly told was off limits. He took the stairs 2 at a time anyway, Isla's words echoing. The door stood ajar, and through the gap, he saw exactly what his daughter had described. Diana Sterling, CEO of a $2 billion empire, collapsed on a leather sofa, shivering despite the blanket someone had draped over her. Her face was pale, sheened with sweat, her breathing raspy in a way that suggested lungs struggling against infection. Papers scattered everywhere, a laptop still glowing with spreadsheets, empty coffee cups forming a small army on the desk. Carter crossed the room without thinking. His hand against her forehead confirmed what he already knew. Fever high enough to be dangerous. Diana's eyes flickered open, unfocused, glassy. When did you last eat? The question seemed to confuse her. She tried to sit up, failed, fell back against cushions that probably cost more than his monthly salary. I'm fine. I don't need... You need a doctor and food and about 12 hours of sleep. Carter looked around the study at the evidence of someone working themselves to death. When was the last time you slept? Diana's jaw tightened, even as her body betrayed her with another shiver. The board meeting is Tuesday. I have to prepare. I have to. You have to not die. Carter's voice came out harder than he intended. I've got a daughter who spent a year watching her mother deteriorate. I know what it looks like when someone stops taking care of themselves. You're about 3 days from a hospital bed. The mention of death, or maybe the mention of mothers dying, seemed to puncture something in Diana's resistance. Her eyes closed, and for just a moment, she looked young, fragile human. The board meeting is Tuesday. I have to prove I can do this. I have to. You have to rest. Whatever you have to prove, you can't prove it from an ICU. Silence. Then slowly Diana nodded. Carter helped her to her bedroom, a process that required more physical contact than their contract technically allowed, but seemed necessary given the circumstances. Her suite was exactly what he'd expected. Enormous, immaculate, utterly impersonal. Nothing on the walls except a single photograph of a stern-faced man who must have been her father. He settled her under covers that probably cost more than his truck, found a thermometer in her bathroom that registered 104.2 degrees, and called the family doctor whose number was programmed into the house phone. Then he went downstairs, made soup from whatever he could find in the industrial refrigerator, and carried it up on a tray with crackers and water and the cold medicine he'd located in her cabinet. Diana watched him set the tray down, her expression unreadable. You don't have to do this. It's not in the contract. Neither is watching you die. Carter sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining careful distance. Eat the soup, take the medicine. Maybe consider that 3 hours of sleep a night isn't sustainable for anyone, even someone as determined as you. Her voice came out small, genuinely confused. Why do you care? The question landed with weight. Carter realized she wasn't being rhetorical. She genuinely didn't understand why anyone would care about her well-being beyond what she could provide them. Because you're a person, and people take care of each other. That's how it works. Diana's throat moved. Something glistened in her eyes, quickly blinked away. The soup is probably terrible. I'm not much of a cook, but it's hot and it's food, and my grandmother always said that was half the battle. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Carter. He turned. She'd never called him by his first name before. Diana held his gaze, and for just a moment the mask was completely gone. Thank you. 2 words. Simple. But from a woman who'd probably never said them without a contract demanding it, they felt like a victory. The fever broke on Sunday night. Carter knew because he'd been checking on her every 3 hours, ignoring her protests, ignoring the contract, ignoring everything except the fact that someone had to make sure she didn't die alone in a mansion full of empty rooms. Monday morning, he found her in the kitchen wearing silk pajamas and a robe that probably cost more than his first car, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since he'd met her. Without the severe bun, without the suits, without the armor, she looked almost soft. You're supposed to be in bed. Diana looked up from the cup of coffee she was nursing. I'm supposed to be at work. This is a compromise. A bad one. She took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. Where's Isla still asleep? She was worried about you, by the way. Kept calling you the lady with no smile and asking if you were going to be okay. Something flickered across Diana's face. She says a lot of things, most of them more perceptive than any 6-year-old has a right to be. Carter moved to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup. She draws you, you know, has a whole collection. I found them in her sketchbook last week. Diana's fingers tightened on her mug. She draws me. You're always standing alone in big rooms with lots of windows. Carter leaned against the counter, cradling his coffee. She calls them the lonely lady pictures. Diana's jaw tightened. I'm not lonely. I didn't say you were. I said that's what she sees. The silence that followed felt different. Less hostile. More like 2 strangers who'd shared a trench, acknowledging the experience without knowing how to talk about it. The board meeting was rescheduled. Wednesday instead of Tuesday. My assistant handled it. Carter nodded. Good. I'm still not taking a vacation. Nobody asked you to. And this doesn't change anything. Diana's voice hardened, the mask sliding back into place. We're still strangers, Mr. Hayes. This arrangement is still temporary. I just wanted to be clear about that. Carter set down his coffee and met her eyes. I never expected anything different, Mrs. Sterling. He left her alone in the kitchen with her cold coffee and her carefully constructed walls. But as he climbed the stairs to check on Isla, he couldn't help wondering what it would take to make the Ice Queen smile. The next 4 weeks settled into something that almost resembled routine. Carter learned the rhythms of his new life. Morning drop-offs at Westbrook Academy where Isla charmed teachers and made friends with the fearlessness she brought to everything. Afternoons spent maintaining the mansion because he couldn't sit idle, couldn't accept charity without contributing something, and Diana's estate was in worse shape than its pristine exterior suggested. Evenings of homework and dinner and bedtime stories, the same rituals he'd maintained in the apartment, now performed in rooms that cost more than his yearly salary. Diana was a ghost. She appeared for scheduled events, company galas, charity dinners, the occasional photo opportunity. During these moments, they performed their roles perfectly. She smiled for cameras. He held her hand when required. They spoke to each other with the practiced warmth of longtime couples, saying nothing real while saying everything expected. Then the camera stopped and the ice returned, until Isla started coughing. It began as nothing, a dry cough, the kind every kid got in November when the seasons changed and classrooms became Petri dishes. Carter gave her cough syrup, made sure she drank water, kept her home from school for a day. The cough persisted, but didn't worsen. He told himself it was fine. Kids got coughs. Then she started turning blue. Carter woke at midnight to silence. The wrong kind of silence. The kind that sent him sprinting down the hallway on pure instinct, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. Isla sat upright in bed, gasping for air, each inhale a battle she was losing. Her lips had gone blue, her fingernails too. She looked at him with eyes too wide, too scared, and tried to speak. Daddy, I can't breathe. Carter's world narrowed to a single point. His daughter struggling for air. His daughter's lips tinged with blue. His daughter dying in front of him. He ran, 3 flights of stairs, 50 feet of hallway, his fist pounding against Diana's bedroom door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Diana, Diana, I need help. The door flew open. Diana stood there in silk pajamas, her hair wild, her eyes alert with the instant wakefulness of someone who'd never fully trusted sleep. What? It's Isla. She can't breathe. I need... His voice broke. I don't know what to do. For one terrible second, Diana didn't move. Then something shifted in her face, something human, something fierce. Follow me. She was already running, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with authority. This is Diana Sterling. I need my medical team at the estate immediately. Pediatric cardiac emergency. I don't care what time it is. Get Dr. Whitmore on the phone now. They reached Isla's room and Carter's heart shattered. His daughter was worse. The blue had spread from her lips to her face. She was barely conscious, slumped against her pillows like a marionette with cut strings. Carter gathered her into his arms, his whole body shaking. Baby, baby, stay with me. Stay with Daddy. Help is coming. Diana knelt beside them, her phone still pressed to her ear, but her free hand reached out and touched Isla's face with unexpected gentleness. Hello, little one. You're being very brave. Can you keep being brave just a little longer? There are doctors coming who are going to help you feel better. Isla's eyes fluttered open. The lady, yes. The lady with no smile. Diana's voice caught, then steadied. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to smile for you if you keep being brave. Carter watched frozen as Diana Sterling did something he'd never seen. She smiled. It wasn't practiced, wasn't polished, was barely even a smile at all. But it was real. And Isla smiled back. The next 3 hours blurred into a nightmare of medical equipment Carter didn't recognize being wheeled through hallways. He'd walked 100 times, voices speaking in a language of acronyms and measurements that meant nothing except the way they made his blood run cold. Eleanor Whitmore arrived in a helicopter because apparently that was a thing you could do when you had unlimited money and a child who needed saving. She took control with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, issuing orders that sent nurses and technicians moving with purpose. Diana never left. She stood in the corner of Isla's room, still in her pajamas, still disheveled, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. She made calls, gave orders. summoned specialists who arrived in the middle of the night because Diana Sterling commanded and the world obeyed. And when the crisis passed, when Isla's oxygen levels stabilized and her color returned, and the doctors finally stopped looking quite so terrified, Diana walked over to where Carter sat slumped in a chair, too exhausted to move, too grateful to speak. She's going to be okay. Dr. Whitmore wants to move up the surgery next week instead of next month. I've already approved it. Carter looked up at this woman who'd bought him like property, who'd designed a purple room for a child she barely knew, who'd just spent 3 hours making phone calls that probably saved his daughter's life. Why? His voice was raw. Why did you do all this? Why do you care? Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair beside him, closer than they'd ever been when cameras weren't watching. I told you why I chose you. In that parking lot, the way you looked at me like I was just a person. You are just a person. No. She shook her head and something cracked in her voice. I'm the CEO, the target, the symbol. I haven't been just a person since I was 16 years old. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely a whisper. But your daughter looks at me like I'm a person every time. She doesn't see the money or the power or the walls. She just sees me, whatever that is. Carter's throat tightened. She drew a picture of me smiling. 2 months ago. I found it on the kitchen counter. She'd written someday at the bottom. Diana's voice broke. I've never had anyone believe I could be happy before. The silence between them was different now. Not cold, not hostile, something else entirely. The contract, Carter started. I know what the contract says. Diana turned to face him, and her eyes were glistening. But sitting in that parking lot 6 months ago, watching you fall apart because you couldn't save your daughter, I thought I understood desperation. I thought I knew what it meant to do anything to survive. And now he looked toward Isla's room, where the doctors were still monitoring, still watching, still making sure the crisis was truly past. Now I think I might have been wrong. Her voice broke. I didn't marry for survival. Carter, I married because you looked at me like I was worth looking at. And I've been so terrified of what that means that I've spent 6 weeks pretending it meant nothing. Carter reached out. His hand found hers cool and dry, like it had been that first day in her office. But this time she didn't pull away. What does it mean? Diana's fingers tightened around his. I don't know, but maybe we could find out. In the purple room down the hall, little girl with a fragile heart slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. And in the hallway outside, 2 strangers sat in silence, holding hands in the darkness, no longer quite as strange to each other as they'd been before. The surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 7 days of waiting, 7 days of watching Isla color in her purple room, pretending everything was normal, while her heart struggled with every beat. 7 days of Carter pacing hallways he'd never expected to call home, counting hours like a man on death row. And 7 days of something shifting between him and Diana Sterling. It started small. A cup of coffee waiting for him on the kitchen counter each morning, still steaming, prepared before Diana left for work. A text message at noon, brief and businesslike, but unmistakably intentional. How is she today? A presence in the doorway each evening when Diana returned, hovering for just a moment before retreating to her study, as if checking that they were still there, that they hadn't vanished like a dream she'd been foolish enough to believe. Carter noticed everything now. The way Diana's heels slowed when she passed Isla's room. The way her voice softened almost imperceptibly when she spoke his daughter's name. The way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, with an expression that was equal parts hunger and terror. On the 4th day, Isla asked if Diana could read her bedtime story. Carter was sitting on the edge of the bed, Goodnight Moon open in his lap, when his daughter's small hand touched his wrist. Daddy, yeah, sweetheart, can the lady read tonight? Isla's eyes were serious, the way only a child's could be when asking for something that mattered. She has a pretty voice. I heard her on the phone once talking to someone about numbers, and even the numbers sounded pretty. Carter's throat tightened. I don't know if she's home yet, sweetheart. She works late. She's home. Isla pointed toward the window. I saw her car, the fancy one with the quiet engine. Of course she had. Nothing got past his daughter. Nothing ever had. I'll ask her, but she might be busy. She has a lot of important things to do. It wasn't a question, just Isla processing the world. More important than stories, Carter closed the book and stood. No, sweetheart, nothing's more important than stories. He found Diana in the kitchen, which was strange enough on its own. She stood at the island, a glass of wine untouched. Beside her, staring at nothing, still in her work clothes, still armored. But something in her posture suggested the armor was heavier tonight than usual. Long day. She startled, spinning toward him with the coiled readiness of someone who'd learned early that surprises were rarely pleasant. When she saw it was him, she relaxed. Marginally. Every day is long. She picked up the wine, took a sip, set it down without really drinking. How is she good? Tired. Carter leaned against the door frame, maintaining the careful distance that had become their default. She has a request, actually. Diana's expression shifted to something that might have been hope or might have been dread. A request: she wants you to read her bedtime story. The wine glass stopped halfway to Diana's lips. Me, you. Carter couldn't quite suppress a smile at her expression, somewhere between panic and wonder. She says you have a pretty voice, that even numbers sound pretty when you say them. Diana set down the glass with more force than necessary. I've never... She stopped, took a breath, tried again. I wouldn't know what to do. You read the words on the page. You do the voices if you're feeling ambitious. You kiss her forehead when you're done. Carter shrugged. It's not complicated. Everything's complicated, not this. He pushed off from the door frame and crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough to see the uncertainty swimming in her eyes. She's a kid who wants a story, Diana. That's all. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or memory. No one ever read to me, not after my mother died. My father he wasn't the bedtime story type. Then maybe this is your chance to learn. Diana held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. They walked to Isla's room together, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. And Carter tried not to think about how natural it felt. How right. Isla's face lit up when she saw Diana in the doorway. You came, I came. Diana approached the bed like she was approaching a negotiation, cautious and calculating. But when Isla patted the mattress beside her, Diana sat, stiffly, awkwardly, as if she'd forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. Carter handed her the book and retreated to the chair in the corner watching. Good night, Moon. Diana's voice was uncertain. By Margaret Wise Brown, you have to show the pictures. Isla instructed with the authority of someone who knew the rules. That's the rule. Of course, Diana turned the book so Isla could see, and something in her posture shifted, softened. In the great green room, there was a telephone, and a red balloon, and a picture of... She read the whole book. Her voice started stiff, self-conscious, but by the third page, something had changed. The words flowed more easily. The rhythm found itself. And when Isla giggled at her attempt at the quiet old lady whispering hush, Diana smiled, actually smiled, not the calculated smile from press photos or the desperate smile from the night Isla couldn't breathe. A real smile surprised out of her by a child's laughter. And Carter felt something crack open in his chest. The end, Diana said softly, closing the book. Good night, Moon. Good night, stars. Isla murmured, her eyes already heavy. Good night, lady. Diana's breath caught. Good night, Isla. She leaned down, hesitated, then pressed a kiss to Isla's forehead. Quick and uncertain, like she wasn't sure she had the right. But she did it. Carter met her at the door as she slipped out, and they stood together in the hallway, watching through the gap as Isla's breathing evened into sleep. She called me lady, Diana whispered. Not the lady, just lady. Progress. Diana turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if she'd allowed them to fall. I don't know how to do this, Carter, any of it. I don't know how to be whatever she needs me to be. Nobody does. He reached out almost without thinking and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That's kind of the secret of parenting. You just keep showing up and hoping you don't mess it up too badly. She didn't pull away from his touch, didn't retreat behind her walls. Instead, she leaned into it just slightly, like a flower turning towards sun it had never expected to feel. What if I mess it up badly, then you apologize and try again? Carter let his hand drop, but he didn't step back. That's how it works. That's how all of it works. They stood there in the hallway, inches apart, breathing the same air. Thank you, Diana said finally, for asking me, for letting me. She asked for you, Carter reminded her. I just delivered the message. Still, Diana's voice was barely audible. Thank you. The day of the surgery arrived like an execution date. Carter had been awake since 3, sitting in the chair beside Isla's bed, watching her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face in case he couldn't finish that thought. Couldn't let himself go there. Diana found him at 5, still in the chair, still watching. The car will be here in an hour. Her voice was soft from the doorway. Dr. Whitmore's team is already prepping. Carter nodded without looking up. His hand was wrapped around Isla's, careful not to disturb the IV port the home nurses had placed last night. Carter. Diana crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, her silk robe pooling on the carpet. Look at me. He did. And what he saw in her eyes wasn't pity, wasn't the professional distance he'd expected. It was fear, raw and honest and completely unhidden. She's going to be okay. Diana said it like she was willing it into existence. I've hired the best cardiac team in the country. I've reviewed their credentials personally. The success rate for this procedure is 85%. And the other 15, Diana's jaw tightened. I don't accept those odds. Not for her. Something broke loose in Carter's chest. The wall he'd been building since the diagnosis. The one that kept him upright and functional and not screaming into the void. It crumbled just for a moment, and what came out was the voice of a terrified father who'd already lost too much. I can't lose her, Diana. She's all I have. She's everything. If something happens in that operating room, then we'll face it together. The words hung between them. Carter stared at her. This woman who'd started as a transaction and somehow become something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. Together, Diana's hand covered his where it rested on Isla's. I didn't sign that contract for company. I didn't bring you into my home because I wanted a family. I told myself it was business, protection, armor. She paused. But I was wrong. Her voice broke on the last word. I was wrong about so many things, Carter. And I don't know what any of this means or where it's going or whether I even have the right to feel what I'm feeling. But I know I can't watch you go through this alone. I know that little girl matters to me in ways I didn't think I was capable of anymore. And I know that if something happens to her, it won't just be you who's destroyed. Carter turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The 15%. I won't accept it. Neither will I. They stayed like that until the sun rose. Two people who'd started as strangers holding on to each other, while a little girl with a broken heart slept between them. And when the medical team arrived, when they loaded Isla onto a gurney and wheeled her toward the future, Carter and Diana walked beside her. Together. The hospital was a cathedral of modern medicine, all glass walls and hushed efficiency, and people in scrubs moving with purpose that suggested lives hung in the balance. Carter had been in hospitals before too many times, but always in the waiting rooms of public facilities, watching numbers tick down on government-issued machines while insurance claims piled up like accusations. This was different. This was money translating directly into hope. Isla had her own prep room bigger than their old apartment, with windows overlooking a garden designed specifically to soothe anxious families. A team of nurses attended to her with focused attention that came from knowing exactly who was paying the bills. Dr. Whitmore explained the procedure with confidence that bordered on supernatural, her hands moving through the air as if choreographing Isla's healing. We're repairing the ventricular septal defect using a minimally invasive approach. We'll go in through a small incision between the ribs, patch the hole, and have her out of surgery in approximately 4 hours. Recovery time is typically 2 to 3 weeks, with full activity resumption in 6 to 8. And the risks, Dr. Whitmore's expression didn't waver. There are always risks with cardiac surgery, Mr. Hayes. Bleeding, infection, adverse reaction to anesthesia. But your daughter is young, otherwise healthy, and in the best possible hands. I've performed this procedure over 300 times with a success rate well above the national average. Carter nodded, but the numbers blurred. Statistics meant nothing when it was your child on the table. Diana stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his. She hadn't left his side since they'd arrived. Hadn't taken a single business call. Hadn't even checked her phone. When can we see her before they take her in? Dr. Whitmore gestured toward the prep room. She's being prepped now. You have about 20 minutes. 20 minutes to say everything that mattered. 20 minutes, that might be the last. Carter pushed through the door before the thought could finish forming. Isla sat up in bed, dwarfed by the hospital gown and the machines surrounding her, but her smile was as bright as ever. Mr. Trunks was clutched against her chest, and she'd somehow convinced a nurse to let her wear the elephant's matching bow in her hair, Daddy. She held out her arms, and Carter crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering her against him as carefully as he could without disturbing the monitors. They said, "I'm going to take a really long nap, and when I wake up, my heart will work better." "That's right, sweetheart." His voice was thick. "The doctors are going to fix you up good as new." "Will it hurt?" "No, baby. You won't feel a thing." Isla nodded solemnly, then peered around his shoulder. "Is Diana here?" Diana stepped forward from the doorway, and something in her expression made Carter's heart stutter. She looked terrified, completely, utterly terrified in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm here, Isla." "Good." Isla reached out one small hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Diana took it. "I want you to hold Daddy's hand while I'm sleeping. He gets scared when I'm at the hospital." "I can do that. Promise?" "I promise." Isla smiled, satisfied. Then she looked between them with an expression far too knowing for a 6-year-old. "You're supposed to be married, right? That's what the people on TV said. Mrs. Sterling and her new husband." Carter and Diana exchanged a glance. "That's right, sweetheart. Then you should hold hands even when I'm not sleeping." Isla's tone was matter-of-fact, the way children's tones always were when stating obvious truths. "Married people hold hands. That's the rule." "Is it?" Diana's voice warmed despite the fear. "Mommy and Daddy used to hold hands all the time." Isla's grip on Diana's fingers tightened. "Before Mommy went to heaven, I remember." The air in the room went still. Carter felt the words land like physical blows. Sarah's hands, Sarah's warmth, Sarah's love lost to cancer and time, but not to memory. His daughter remembered. "Your mommy sounds like she was very smart." Diana's voice was soft. She was. Isla nodded, and pretty, and she always smelled like flowers. A pause. "You smell like flowers too sometimes." "The white ones in the garden." Diana's composure cracked. A single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek before she could stop it. "Jasmine. It was my mother's favorite." "Maybe they're friends," Isla said with the simple logic of childhood. "Your mommy and my mommy in heaven. Maybe they talk about us." Carter couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. But Diana who never cried, who never broke, who never let anyone see behind the mask. Diana knelt beside the hospital bed and pressed her forehead against Isla's small hand. "Maybe they do," her voice breaking. "Maybe they're watching right now, making sure you're brave." "I'm brave," Isla confirmed. "Daddy says I'm the bravest girl in the whole world." "He's right." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for her. Dr. Whitmore is waiting." The next 5 minutes were a blur of final kisses and whispered promises, and Carter's heart shattering into pieces he wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. He watched them wheel his daughter away. Mr. Trunks clutched in her arms, and he didn't realize he was shaking until Diana's hand found his. Cool and dry. But this time it was shaking too. The waiting room was designed for comfort, but comfort was impossible when your child's heart was open on a table. Carter sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his old couch, staring at a wall of windows that overlooked the hospital garden. The sun was bright. Birds were singing. The world continued as if nothing was happening, as if the universe didn't care that his entire existence was balanced on a knife's edge. Diana sat beside him. She hadn't let go of his hand since they'd left the prep room. Her fingers were still laced through his, and every so often she squeezed like she was checking that he was still there, still breathing, still holding on. "I should make some calls," she said at one point, but she didn't move. "You should," Carter agreed, but he didn't let go. An hour passed. 2. The clock on the wall ticked with the precision of a metronome, each second stretching into eternity. "Tell me about her mother," Diana said suddenly. Carter looked at her. "What's Sarah?" "Isla's mother. Your wife." Diana's gaze was steady, but something vulnerable lurked beneath. "Tell me about her." It was an unexpected request, an intimate one. The kind of question that cracked open doors Carter had kept carefully sealed for years. But somehow, with Diana's hand in his and his daughter's life in a stranger's hands, it didn't feel invasive. It felt necessary. "She was a kindergarten teacher," Carter said slowly, "in a public school in Van Nuys. Made nothing, gave everything. the kind of person who kept snacks in her desk for kids whose parents couldn't afford breakfast. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I met her at a hardware store of all places. She was trying to buy parts for a broken toilet, and she had absolutely no idea what she was doing. So you helped her. I fixed her toilet, then I fixed her kitchen faucet, then her garbage disposal. Carter shook his head. I kept finding reasons to come back, and she kept finding things that needed fixing. Took us 3 months to admit we were just making excuses to see each other. How long were you married? 3 years. Would have been 4, but the words stuck in his throat. She got sick, started with a backache that wouldn't go away. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. Diana's grip tightened. I'm sorry. She lived 6 months after the diagnosis. 6 months of hospitals and treatments and watching her disappear piece by piece. Carter's voice dropped to a whisper. Isla was 2. She doesn't remember much, just fragments. Sarah's voice, the way she laughed, the smell of flowers. She remembered, Diana said quietly, in the prep room. She remembered holding hands. Kids remember what matters. Carter turned to look at her, even when they're too young to understand why. Silence fell between them, comfortable in a way that came from shared grief, shared understanding, the recognition that loss was a language all its own. My mother died when I was 12, Diana said suddenly. Cancer too, different kind, but the same ending. She stared at their joined hands. My father, he never recovered. Threw himself into work, built an empire, forgot he had a daughter. Is that why you are the way you are? What way is that armored? Carter chose the word carefully, like you're expecting an attack from every direction. Because I am. Diana's jaw tightened. The board, the investors, the competitors, the press. Everyone wants something. Everyone's angling for position. And if you show weakness, any weakness, they tear you apart. Sounds exhausting. It is. She paused. It was. Before. Before what Diana turned to face him, and her eyes were unguarded in a way he'd never seen. Raw and honest and completely vulnerable. Before a stranger in a parking lot looked at me like I was human. Before a little girl with a broken heart decided I was worth drawing. Before I walked into a purple bedroom and remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. Not because of my money or my power or what I could do for them. Just because. Carter's breath caught. Diana, I don't know what this is. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what we're doing or where it's going. The contract says we're strangers who share an address. But you don't feel like a stranger, Carter. Not anymore. And I don't know what to do with that. He lifted their joined hands, studying the way his fingers looked wrapped around hers. Calloused against smooth. Working class against wealth. 2 people who never should have crossed paths, bound together by desperation and paperwork. Maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just have to see what happens. Before she could respond, the door opened. Dr. Whitmore appeared, still in her surgical scrubs, and Carter's heart stopped. The surgeon smiled. The surgery was successful. Isla's in recovery and she's asking for Mr. Trunks. Carter's legs gave out. He sank back into the chair, his whole body trembling, and the sob that escaped him was primal, raw, the sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for years finally being allowed to exhale. Diana caught him before he could collapse completely, her arms wrapped around him, pulling him close. And for once, there was no distance, no contract, no pretense. Just 2 people holding each other while the world righted itself. She's okay, Diana whispered against his hair. She's okay. She's okay. Carter clung to her like a drowning man, and for the first time since Sarah died, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The 8 weeks of recovery transformed the mansion in ways Carter hadn't anticipated. Diana began working from home 3 days a week, her laptop set up at the kitchen island, while Isla drew pictures at her elbow. Beatrice noticed the change, first commenting to Carter one morning that she hadn't seen Diana eat breakfast at home in 15 years. Dinner became sacred. Not every night, Diana still had obligations, meetings that ran late, emergencies that demanded her attention. But most nights she appeared in the dining room at 6:30, shed her armor at the door, and sat across from them while Isla narrated her day in breathless detail. The stories ranged from playground politics to the injustice of homework to profound observations about why the sky was blue and whether dogs dreamed and if heaven had playgrounds. Diana listened with an attention that seemed to surprise even her occasionally contributing thoughts that made Asila's eyes go wide with wonder. One evening, Isla asked why rich people needed so many forks. Diana explained the history of formal dining with unexpected patience, then admitted she'd never understood it either, and usually just worked from the outside in. Isla declared this the smartest thing she'd ever heard, and Diana's laugh, genuine, unguarded, echoed through rooms that had never heard such a sound. The bedtime stories continued. Diana arrived at Isla's door each night at 8, whatever book Isla had chosen tucked under her arm. Her voices improved with practice. The dragon became properly fearsome, the princess properly regale, the talking animals properly absurd. And when Isla finally drifted off, Diana would kiss her forehead and linger in the doorway for just a moment, as if memorizing something precious. Carter watched it all unfold with something that felt dangerously close to hope. One night after Isla had fallen asleep mid-sentence about a bear who ate too much honey, Carter and Diana found themselves on the back terrace. The city stretched below them, a carpet of lights that made the darkness seem less absolute. They sat side by side on the stone-ledged shoulders, almost touching, not speaking because words felt unnecessary. "I never imagined this." Diana's voice broke the silence. "What do you mean feeling at peace? Feeling like I belong somewhere. You do belong. Here. With us." Diana turned to look at him, and her eyes reflected the city lights like captured stars. "The contract expires in 2 years and 4 months, I know. And then what?" Her question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to name. "Then we figure it out," Carter said finally. "Together. Together." Diana repeated the word like she was testing its weight. "I could get used to that." The Sterling Enterprises Charity Gala was an annual event that drew 600 of Los Angeles's wealthiest and most influential. The ballroom at the Beverly Wilshire gleamed with crystal and gold, the kind of opulence that made Carter's borrowed tuxedo feel like costume. Diana had insisted on having it tailored, had sent a team to the house to measure and fit and fuss over him like he was something worth perfecting. Now standing at the edge of the ballroom with Diana's hand resting in the crook of his arm, he understood why. Every eye in the room had tracked their entrance. Every conversation had paused. The CEO and her mysterious husband, the love story that had captivated the tabloids, finally on display. Diana's dress was midnight blue, cut to emphasize power rather than vulnerability. Her hair was up, her makeup flawless, her expression carrying the cool assessment of a woman who'd learned to weaponize beauty. But Carter could feel the tension in her grip, the slight tremor in her fingers that suggested the armor sat heavier tonight than usual. Patricia Walsh approached first, her smile genuine, in a way that suggested she'd moved from skeptic to ally somewhere along the way. "Diana, Carter, you both look wonderful." "Patricia." Diana's voice warmed marginally. "Thank you for coming, wouldn't miss it." Patricia's eyes moved to Carter with unexpected kindness. "How's Isla recovering?" "Beautifully. She's already plotting her return to gymnastics class." "Good, that child has spirit. She gets it from her father." Diana's words carried weight that made Carter's chest tighten. They navigated the room together, Diana introducing Carter to faces that blurred together in a parade of expensive suits and practiced smiles. Most were polite, some were curious. A few looked at Carter like he was an interesting specimen, a construction worker who'd somehow infiltrated their world and might contaminate it with his presence. Carter kept his expression neutral and his grip on Diana's hand firm. Then Marcus Ashford appeared. He materialized from the crowd with the confidence of a man who believed he owned every room he entered. Tall, impeccably dressed, his smile carrying charm like a weapon. Carter had seen his photo in the files Diana had given him, but the image hadn't captured the casual arrogance, the sense that Marcus viewed other people as obstacles or opportunities. "Nothing in between, Diana. You look stunning as always. And this must be the husband." "The handyman, correct?" His tone made the word sound like an insult wrapped in courtesy. "Carter, I fix things. I'm sure you do." Marcus's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Some things I'm afraid can't be fixed. Isn't that right?" Diana's hand tightened on Carter's arm. "Marcus was just leaving. Was I? I don't recall." Marcus stepped closer, invading their space with the ease of someone who'd never been denied anything. "I was hoping we could catch up. For old time's sake." "There are no old times, Marcus. There never were. That's not what I remember." His voice dropped, carrying an intimacy that made Carter's jaw clench. I remember quite a lot, actually. Long nights in your office, private dinners, the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. The lady said you were leaving. Carter kept his voice quiet, but something in his tone made nearby conversations pause. Marcus's gaze snapped to him, and the mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. The lady can speak for herself. She always has. Though I wonder, he leaned in close enough that Carter could smell expensive cologne mixed with something that might have been malice. Does she speak for herself with you, or do you just do what you're told? A trained monkey in a rented suit. This suit was tailored, Carter said mildly, and I don't think I'm the one who's trained here. Something dangerous flickered in Marcus's eyes. You don't know what you're dealing with, boy. This world, these people, this woman. He gestured dismissively at the ballroom. You're a novelty, a toy, and when she gets tired of playing with you, you'll be thrown away like all the others. Marcus, Diana's voice had gone deadly calm, the voice of a CEO about to destroy someone. Walk away now before I decide to share some interesting stories with our mutual friends. Stories about your creative accounting practices, your offshore accounts, your recent conversations with our competitors. Marcus's face paled. You wouldn't. Try me. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Marcus's composure cracked, and he stepped back with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. This isn't over, Diana. You know it isn't. Yes, it is. She turned her back on him, a deliberate dismissal that said more than words ever could. Goodbye, Marcus. Carter watched the man retreat into the crowd, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the ugliness beneath. Who was that? Carter asked when they were alone again. Diana's mask had slipped back into place, but he could see the tremor in her hands. No one important. That didn't look like no one. She was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she met his eyes. He was a mistake. One I made 3 years ago when I was lonely and stupid and desperate for someone to see me as something other than a bank account. Her voice was flat, reciting facts rather than reliving them. It lasted 8 months. He wanted access to the company, the board, my father's contacts. When I figured out what he was really after, I ended it. He didn't take it well, I gathered. He's been trying to destroy me ever since. Quietly, of course. Rumors, undermining, whisper campaigns about my stability, my judgment. She paused. He's the one who convinced half the board that I needed a husband to be taken seriously. Carter processed this. So when you came looking for a husband, I was playing his game, beating him at it. Her jaw tightened. He wanted me vulnerable. I gave him exactly what he asked for in a way he never expected. Me. You. She looked at him, and something softened in her expression. The one thing he couldn't predict. The one thing he can't corrupt. Carter reached for her hand. I won't let him hurt you. Or Isla. Whatever game he's playing, whatever he tries next, I'm here. Diana's composure cracked just for a moment, just long enough for him to see the fear she'd been hiding, the exhaustion of years spent fighting alone. I believe you, and that terrifies me more than anything Marcus could ever do. Why? Because the last time I believed someone like this, they destroyed everything. Carter stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of her body, to count the faint freckles scattered across her nose. I'm not him. I'm not any of them. I know. Her voice broke on the words. That's why I'm terrified. They left the gala early. Diana's headache, a convenient excuse that no one questioned. The drive home was silent, but Carter's hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat, and she didn't pull away. That night, after checking on Isla, Carter found himself unable to sleep. He wandered downstairs to the kitchen, poured a glass of water he didn't drink, and stared out the window at the garden below. The moon was full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Can't sleep either. Diana's voice made him turn. She stood in the doorway wearing silk pajamas in an expression that suggested she'd been wrestling with something heavy. Too much on my mind. She crossed to the aisle and stood on the opposite side, maintaining the careful distance that had become their default. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight the distance felt like something they were both ready to close. I keep thinking about what Marcus said, about you being temporary, about me getting tired of you. Diana's fingers traced patterns on the marble countertop. He was wrong about the getting tired part, but the temporary part. The contract ends. I know. Carter set down his glass. But that doesn't mean we end. unless you want us to. I don't know what I want. Diana's voice was barely audible. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, controlling every variable, eliminating risk. You're a risk, Carter. Everything about you is a risk. Is that a problem? It should be, her eyes lifted to meet his. But when you look at me, I don't want to run. I don't want to calculate the angles or prepare for betrayal. I just want to stay in whatever this is for however long it lasts. Carter felt the words land somewhere deep in his chest. This woman who'd spent her life building empires and fortresses admitting that she wanted to stay with him. With them. The contract ends in 2 years and 4 months. What happens then? Diana's lips curved in something that was almost a smile. Then we negotiate new terms. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but from a woman who spoke in contracts and clauses, it was everything. Carter closed the distance between them. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, to rebuild her walls, to push him away. She didn't. She watched him approach with those winter storm eyes, and when he sat beside her close enough to feel her warmth, she didn't pull back. Can I ask you something? You can ask anything. Why did you really marry me? The full truth. Not the business reason, not the board protection. The reason you don't say out loud. Diana's composure flickered. Because I saw you fall apart. In that parking lot. I watched you break, and then I watched you put yourself back together. Not for yourself, for her. For that little girl who needed you to be strong. Her voice cracked. And I thought if someone could love that completely, that selflessly, then maybe they could teach me how. You don't need teaching. I need something. She looked at him, and her walls were completely gone. I've been empty for so long, Carter. Filling the void with work and power and money, pretending it was enough. But it wasn't. It never was. And then you walked into my office in your borrowed tie and your scuffed work boots, and you looked at me like I was just a person. And I thought maybe that's what I've been missing. Carter reached out his hand, cupping her face, tilting it toward him. She leaned into the touch like she'd been starving for it. You're not empty. You're scared. There's a difference. What if I'm both, then we're scared together? His thumb traced her cheekbone. That's what partners do. Diana's breath hitched. We're not supposed to be partners. But the words had no weight. The contract. Forget the contract. Carter leaned closer. Just for tonight, just for this moment. What do you want, Diana? Not what's safe, not what's calculated. What do you actually want? Her eyes searched his face, and then she answered. Not with words. She closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, uncertain. Two people learning a language they'd forgotten how to speak. But then something shifted, deepened. Carter's hand slid into her hair, pulling her closer, and Diana's fingers gripped his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. That wasn't in the contract, Diana whispered. No. Carter agreed, it wasn't. What happens now? He rested his forehead against hers, feeling her pulse race beneath his fingertips. Now we figure it out together. 2 weeks later, the scandal broke. Carter woke to 47 missed calls. The number didn't compute at first, his brain still foggy with sleep. Then he saw the headlines and the world tilted sideways. Sterling Heiress's fake marriage exposed, contract reveals 3-year business deal. The article was everywhere, every news site, every social media platform. Someone had leaked the entire contract, all 52 pages, with helpful highlights marking the most damaging sections. Separate bedrooms, no physical intimacy, $2 million trust fund, $12,000 monthly stipend, every clinical detail of their arrangement laid bare for public consumption. The narrative formed instantly. Gold digger handyman seduces billionaire with sick daughter. Poor construction worker exploits sympathetic CEO. The comments were brutal. Carter stopped reading after the first dozen, suggested he should be in prison for fraud. Diana called at 6:30, her voice tight. Don't go outside. There are cameras everywhere. I'm sorry. Carter's throat felt raw. Diana, I'm so sorry. I never meant. This isn't your fault. But we need to talk. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. She hung up before he could respond. Isla came downstairs at 7, her eyes red from crying. Kids at school had already seen the news. Their parents had seen it. Everyone was talking about how her daddy had married Diana for money, how it was all fake, how they were liars. Carter held his daughter while she sobbed, and tried to find words that would make sense of a world that had turned cruel overnight. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Carter wasn't invited, but Diana called him at 2 to prepare him for what was coming. Marcus had already been making calls, rallying support, painting Diana as unstable and deceptive. The vote of no confidence was a formality. She was going to lose. Then Carter's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Hayes. Marcus's voice was oil and poison. I think we should talk. I have nothing to say to you. You might change your mind when you hear what I'm offering. A pause for effect. $5 million in exchange for your testimony that the marriage was entirely fraudulent. That Diana manipulated you, paid you off, used your daughter as a prop. With your statement, the board will have no choice but to remove her. Carter's hand tightened on the phone. You're trying to bribe me. I'm offering you a way out. Think about it, Mr. Hayes. $5 million. You could take your daughter and disappear. Start fresh somewhere away from all this. Away from a woman who bought you like furniture. She didn't buy me, didn't she? The contract was quite explicit about the financial arrangements. Medical coverage, school tuition, a trust fund, all contingent on your performance as a husband. Marcus's voice turned silky. Don't you ever wonder if what you feel is real, or if it's just gratitude? The confusion of a desperate man who mistook rescue for love. The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere vulnerable. For one terrible moment, the doubt crept in. The questions he'd never allowed himself to ask. Was this real? Could it be real, or had he just fallen in love with the feeling of being saved? Then Isla's voice floated in from the living room asking Beatrice when Diana would be home, and the doubt vanished. You know what I think, Carter said quietly? I think you've never loved anyone in your entire life. I think you've never had someone look at you the way Isla looks at Diana when she reads her bedtime stories. I think you've never known what it feels like to have someone believe in you. Not because of what you can give them, but because of who you are. Mr. Hayes, I'm not finished. His voice hardened. You asked if what I feel is real. The answer is yes. Yes, it started as a contract. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, she saved me in ways I can never repay. But that's not why I love her. I love her because she's terrified of connection and she tries anyway. I love her because she reads bedtime stories in funny voices, even though it embarrasses her. I love her because she looks at my daughter like she's the most precious thing in the world. He paused. You can keep your $5 million, Marcus. I'd rather be broke and loved than rich in whatever the hell you are. Carter hung up. 10 seconds later, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You'll regret this. Carter stared at the message. Then he walked into the living room, sat down beside his daughter, and tried to remember what it felt like to breathe. Diana came home at midnight, her heels clicking against marble floors that Carter had learned to recognize by sound alone. He was in the kitchen staring at his phone where the headlines continued to multiply like bacteria. The story had evolved beyond simple scandal into something darker: speculation about child exploitation, questions about whether using Isla's illness constituted fraud, legal experts opining on whether criminal charges might apply. Carter looked up when she entered. Diana's makeup was still flawless, her suit still crisp, but something in her posture had shifted. She looked like someone who'd just finished 12 rounds in a boxing ring and was preparing for 12 more. How bad is it? She poured herself a glass of wine with hands that trembled slightly. Marcus has 9 votes. We need 11 to block the no confidence motion. Patricia's working on swaying 3 more, but Diana stopped, took a long drink, set the glass down harder than necessary. It's bad, Carter. Even if we survive tomorrow, the damage is done. The press is calling for investigations. Clients are questioning our ethics. The stock dropped 4% today. And us, the question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said ever, everything that had shifted in the kitchen 2 weeks ago when she'd kissed him like drowning. Diana crossed to where he stood close enough that he could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. Marcus called you today, didn't he? $5 million to testify against me. How did you know? Because he's predictable and desperate. Her fingers found his cool and steady despite the tremor he'd seen moments before. What did you tell him? Carter pulled her closer until there was no space left between them, no contract or pretense or carefully maintained distance. I told him I'd rather be broke and loved than rich in whatever he is. Diana's breath caught. Her forehead dropped against his chest, and he felt the moment her composure finally cracked the wall she'd maintained through board meetings and scandal and public humiliation finally crumbling. I'm going to lose everything tomorrow. My father's company, my position. 15 years of fighting all gone because I made one stupid decision 3 years ago to trust the wrong person. You didn't make a stupid decision 3 years ago. Carter's arms tightened around her. You made a brilliant decision 6 months ago to save a little girl's life. Everything else is just Marcus being exactly who he's always been. That doesn't change what's coming. No. But we'll face it together. Remember, that's the deal now. She lifted her head and her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. I love you. I should have said it before. Should have said it 1,000 times, but I was scared and now everything's falling apart. And I can't, I know. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I know, and I love you too, no matter what happens tomorrow. They stood there in the kitchen holding each other against a world that wanted to tear them apart. And Carter tried to remember that love wasn't always enough to win, but sometimes it was enough to keep fighting. The investigator Diana had hired was named Jack Morrison, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud. He'd been digging into Marcus's finances for 3 weeks, cross-referencing transactions and bank statements and offshore accounts that most people wouldn't even know to look for. At 7 in the morning, he called Diana's cell with news that made her sit up straighter than Carter had ever seen. I found it. Jack's voice carried the satisfaction of a hunter who just cornered his prey. Marcus has been siphoning money from Sterling Enterprises for 18 months. Started small, 50,000 here, 70,000 there. But it's grown. Current total is $12.3 million, all transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Diana's face had gone pale. You're certain? I've got bank records, transfer authorizations, emails between Marcus and the CFO he bribed to falsify reports. He's been funding a shell company that's buying up shares in your largest competitor. Once you're removed, he'll sell Sterling out piece by piece and make another fortune in the process. Send me everything. Diana's voice had sharpened into something lethal. Every document, every email, every transaction. I want it in my hands in 1 hour. You'll have it in 30 minutes. Diana hung up and looked at Carter with an expression that was half triumph, half fury. He's been stealing from my father's company, from employees' pension funds, from charitable foundations we support. Her hands clenched into fists. He's been planning this for years. The relationship, the betrayal, the whisper campaign about my stability, all of it was set up for this moment. We have him. Carter felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. We can take this to the police, to the SEC. He'll go to prison. Not yet. Diana stood, her movements sharp with purpose. If we report now, he'll flee. He's got money, offshore connections in countries without extradition. We need to trap him first. The board meeting is today. Exactly. Let him think he's won. Let him stand up in front of everyone and demand my removal. And then we show them what he really is. There was one more complication delivered by Diana's lawyer at 8:30 with an apologetic expression that made Carter's stomach drop. There's a problem with the adoption. Diana had been reviewing Jack Morrison's findings when the words hit. She looked up sharply. What problem? The adoption of Isla went through 3 months ago. It's legal and binding. But if you're removed as CEO, if the scandal suggests the marriage was fraudulent, Marcus's lawyers could petition to have the adoption reviewed. They'd argue you adopted Isla under false pretenses, that the marriage foundation of the adoption was a sham. The lawyer paused, clearly uncomfortable. California law allows for adoption reversal in cases of fraud. If a judge agrees, Isla could be removed from your custody pending investigation. Carter felt the floor drop out from under him. They can't do that. She's my daughter. You'd retain full custody as the biological parent, but Diana would lose all parental rights. And Marcus, as a party to the case, could petition for supervised visitation pending the investigation's outcome. Why would he want that? Diana's voice was deadly quiet. Because he knows it would destroy us. He doesn't care about Isla. He just wants to take away everything I love. Carter's hands were shaking. We can't let him anywhere near her. We won't. Diana stood, her jaw set with determination that reminded Carter why she'd survived 15 years in a world designed to crush her. We end this today. All of it. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom looked exactly as Carter had imagined. All dark wood and leather chairs and windows overlooking a city that didn't care who won the wars, fought in rooms like this. 20 seats around an oval table, 19 already occupied when Diana entered. Carter wasn't supposed to be there, but Patricia Walsh had gotten him a seat in the gallery, where legal counsel and observers sat close enough to see everything far enough to maintain the illusion of separation. Marcus sat 3 seats from the head of the table, his posture relaxed, his smile carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed victory was inevitable. The other board members wore expressions ranging from sympathetic to hostile, most leaning toward hostile. Diana had lost them when the contract leaked. Trust once broken didn't repair easily in this world. Diana entered alone, carrying a leather portfolio that Carter knew contained Jack Morrison's findings. She wore crimson, not the charcoal armor of business or the cream silk of their first wedding, but red like blood, like warning, like a declaration of war. Marcus opened the meeting with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd been practicing this moment. We're here to address a matter of grave concern regarding Diana Sterling's fitness to lead this company. Recent revelations about her personal life have called into question her judgment, her honesty, and her commitment to the values Sterling Enterprises represents. Several board members nodded. A few shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Walsh sat stone-faced, revealing nothing. The marriage in question was a contractual arrangement. Marcus continued, his voice carrying practiced outrage. A business transaction disguised as a relationship, using a sick child as a prop to gain sympathy and silence critics. This deception extends to the board, to our shareholders, to the public trust we've spent decades building. He turned to face Diana directly. I move for a vote of no confidence in Diana Sterling's leadership. I call for her immediate removal as CEO, pending a full investigation into potential fraud and misappropriation of company resources. The materials were provided fraudulently. Diana's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood and every eye turned to her. Before we vote on anything, there's information this board needs to see. Information about where that contract actually came from and why it was leaked. Marcus's smile didn't waver. I'm sure you have an explanation, Diana. You always do. But the facts are clear. The facts are that you've been embezzling from this company for 18 months. Diana opened her portfolio and began distributing packets to each board member. $12.3 million transferred to offshore accounts. Money stolen from employee pensions, from charitable foundations, from the company my father built. Marcus's smile finally cracked. That's absurd. You've been falsifying reports with the help of our former CFO, who's currently cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for immunity. Diana's voice never wavered, never rose, just delivered facts like hammer blows. You've been using stolen funds to purchase shares in Novak Industries, our largest competitor. Your plan was to remove me, sell Sterling piece by piece, and profit from both the sale and your investment in our competitor. She pulled out another document. You also hired a hacker to access my private emails, searching for material you could use against me. When you found the marriage contract, you paid Amber Sinclair $500,000 to copy and leak it. Amber Sinclair, seated near the back, went white. This is a desperate attempt to deflect from your own misconduct. Marcus stood, his composure fracturing. You're making wild accusations without evidence. I have bank records, email trails, signed affidavits. Diana's eyes were winter storms. I have everything, Marcus. Every transaction, every law, every dollar you stole. And I've already turned it over to the FBI. The room erupted. Board members reached for the packets, flipping through pages that detailed 18 months of systematic theft. Patricia Walsh's expression hardened into something that promised consequences. Marcus looked around the room, seeing his support crumbling like sand. Carter stood from the gallery, unable to stay silent any longer. You asked this board to judge my wife's character, to question whether a woman who's increased company revenue by 47%, who's expanded into 3 new markets, who's built this company into something stronger than it's ever been, you asked them to judge her because she made an unconventional choice to save a dying child. His voice carried through the room. Yes, our marriage started as a contract. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, she needed a husband to silence critics exactly like you, who believe a woman's marital status matters more than her competence. But what happened after that contract was signed? That was real. Carter moved toward the table, toward Diana. I fell in love with a woman who works 18-hour days and still reads bedtime stories in funny voices. Who cries when she thinks no one's watching because she's terrified of failing the people who depend on her. Who adopted my daughter not for appearances, but because she loves her. He stopped in front of Marcus. You tried to bribe me yesterday. $5 million to testify that Diana manipulated me, that she used my daughter as a prop. You called me a trained monkey, said I was a novelty that would be thrown away. Carter's hands clenched at his sides. But here's what you don't understand about love, Marcus. It's not transactional. It's not something you can buy or sell or twist into a weapon. It's choosing someone every single day, not because you have to, but because you can't imagine not choosing them. The silence in the room was absolute. Diana stood, and her voice when she spoke carried 15 years of fighting, of surviving, of refusing to break. Yes, the marriage started as a contract, but Marcus, you're the reason I needed that contract in the first place. You spent 2 years undermining me, spreading rumors about my stability, convincing this board that an unmarried woman couldn't possibly understand family values or long-term commitment. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. You got what you wanted. You forced me to find a husband. So I did. I found a man who'd never heard of Sterling Enterprises, who didn't want my money or my power or my connections, who looked at me like I was a person instead of a balance sheet. And somewhere along the way, that contract became the best decision I've ever made. Not because it silenced critics, because it gave me a family. Patricia Walsh cleared her throat. I moved to table the vote of no confidence pending investigation into Marcus Ashford's financial activities. I further moved that Marcus Ashford be immediately suspended from this board and barred from company premises pending criminal proceedings. Seconded, the voice came from Robert Chen, one of Marcus's staunchest supporters, now staring at the evidence in front of him with an expression of betrayal. All in favor, 19 hands rose. Only Marcus's chair remained empty. He'd already fled for the door. Security stopped him before he reached the elevator. The FBI agents Patricia had quietly contacted that morning were waiting in the lobby. Carter watched through the boardroom windows as Marcus Ashford was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit and charming smile finally unable to protect him from consequences he'd spent years avoiding. Diana stood at the window beside Carter, her hand finding his. It's over. Her voice carried disbelief, relief, exhaustion. He can't hurt us anymore. Carter pulled her close, and she leaned into him in a way she never had before, letting him carry weight she'd been holding alone too long. What happens now? Diana looked up at him, and for the first time in 6 months, her smile held no shadows. Now we figure out what a real marriage looks like. 3 months later, they stood in the garden of the Sterling Mansion, smaller now since Diana had sold the Pacific Palisades estate and bought something more reasonable in Santa Monica, only 8,000 square feet and 20 rooms they might actually use. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, and Isla stood beneath an arch woven with purple flowers, wearing a cape Beatrice had sewn specifically for this occasion. The guests numbered 15. Patricia Walsh and her husband, Dr. Whitmore and her partner, Beatrice and the groundskeeper, whose name Carter had finally learned was Thomas. Grace Hartwell, who'd traveled from Van Nuys and cried through the entire ceremony. A handful of others who'd earned their place through years of loyalty rather than social obligation. Isla held a small notebook, her handwriting sprawling across pages she'd labored over for weeks. She looked between Carter and Diana with an expression of utmost seriousness. We are gathered here today to marry Daddy and Diana for real this time. A soft laugh rippled through the audience. When Daddy first told me about the lady with no smile, I didn't understand. Isla read carefully, her finger following each word. I didn't understand why we were moving to a big house or why there was a lady who looked so sad all the time. But Daddy said we were going to be a family, and families take care of each other. Carter felt his throat tighten. At first I was scared. The house was too big and too quiet, and the lady never laughed. But then I got sick, really sick, and the lady wasn't sad anymore. She was scared, like Daddy was scared, and she held his hand all night, even though her hand was cold. Diana's fingers tightened around Carter's. That's when I knew. Isla's voice grew stronger. I knew that the lady with no smile wasn't really sad. She was just waiting for someone to love her the way Daddy loves me, the way Mama used to love both of us. Carter's vision blurred. So here are the vows I wrote. Isla lifted her notebook higher. Daddy, do you promise to keep making Diana laugh even when she forgets how I do? Do you promise to hold her hand when she's scared and hug her when she's sad and never ever let her feel lonely again? I do. Isla turned to Diana. Diana, do you promise to keep reading bedtime stories even when you're tired? Diana's voice caught. I do. Do you promise to be patient when Daddy burns the pancakes and to pretend they're good anyway I do? And do you promise, Isla's voice softened, to be my mom? Not to replace my real mom because she's in heaven and I keep her in my heart, but to be my other mom, the one who's here, the one who holds my hand and brushes my hair and tells me everything's going to be okay. Diana's composure shattered. She knelt down heedless of her dress on the grass and gathered Isla into her arms. Yes, I promise, I promise, I promise. Isla hugged her back, small arms wrapped tight around Diana's neck. Good. Then by the power invested in me by myself, I now pronounce you married for real this time. Forever and ever. She looked up at Carter. You can kiss her now, Daddy. Carter didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Diana to her feet and kissed her, really kissed her, while their small audience cheered, and Isla bounced beside them, shouting about how they were a real family, now a forever family. The reception moved indoors as the sun set, 15 people filling a dining room that had been designed for 50, but felt perfectly sized for this gathering. Beatrice had refused caterers again, insisting that family meals required family cooking, and the table groaned under dishes that represented everyone's contributions. Grace's enchiladas, Patricia's mother's lasagna recipe, even the mac and cheese Isla loved from the hospital cafeteria recreated by Dr. Whitmore with surprising accuracy. Patricia raised a toast, her voice warm with emotion Carter hadn't thought her capable of. To Diana and Carter, who taught an old board member that sometimes the most unexpected combinations make the strongest partnerships. May your merger be profitable in all the ways that matter. Dr. Whitmore went next. To Isla, whose heart it turns out was never the problem. It was just waiting for enough love to fill it. Grace's toast was simple. To second chances, and the courage to take them. When it was Beatrice's turn, she simply raised her glass and smiled. About time. The laughter that followed was the warmest sound Carter had ever heard. Later, after dinner and cake and Isla had finally crashed on the couch with Mr. Trunks, Diana found Carter on the terrace. The city stretched below them, familiar now, in ways it hadn't been 6 months ago, when everything had been transaction and survival. I have something for you. Diana pulled an envelope from somewhere in her dress. What's this? Open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Formal letterhead. Legal language. Carter's eyes scanned the words and his heart stuttered. This is your resignation. Effective end of the month. The company will survive without me. Diana's voice was steady. I've spent my entire life fighting for something I inherited. Something I never chose. My father's legacy. My father's empire. My father's expectations. She turned to face him. But in that boardroom, defending myself against Marcus's attack, I realized something. I've been so focused on protecting what my father built that I forgot to build anything of my own. You love that company. I love the fight. Diana shook her head. I loved proving everyone wrong, showing them that a woman could do what they said was impossible. But that's not love, Carter. That's survival. And I'm tired of just surviving. She stepped closer. I want to live. Really live. I want to wake up without 100 emails demanding my attention. I want to have breakfast with my family instead of conference calls. I want to be there when Isla learns to do a cartwheel and when you burn the pancakes and when the garden blooms in spring. What will you do? I don't know yet. Diana smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Maybe consulting, maybe philanthropy. Maybe I'll learn to make pottery or write terrible poetry or do something completely useless and wonderful. That doesn't sound like you. No, it sounds like whoever I'm going to become, and I want to find out who that is. She paused. With you, if you'll have me. Carter answered by kissing her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Diana was laughing. I'll take that as a yes. You can take it as whatever you want. He rested his forehead against hers. I'm just glad you're finally choosing yourself. I'm choosing us. She cupped his face in her hands. That's what I finally understand. Choosing myself and choosing us, it's the same thing. You make me better. You make me want to be better. And I spent so many years thinking that needing someone was weakness. And now I know that the strongest thing I've ever done was letting myself love you. 6 months after that, Diana stood in the kitchen of their Santa Monica house wearing sweatpants and one of Carter's old work shirts, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, looking more beautiful than she'd ever looked in designer suits and armor. Her hand rested on her stomach, still flat, but carrying the future inside it. Isla sat at the table drawing a picture of their family, 4 people now instead of 3. The newest member, just a small circle with a smiley face. Purple, of course. Everything was always purple. Carter burned the pancakes exactly as expected. Diana laughed and ate them anyway, and Isla declared them the best pancakes ever, because that's what 6-year-olds did when they were happy. Later, after Isla had gone to play in the garden that was smaller but somehow more alive than the Pacific Palisades estate had ever been, Carter found an old photograph in a drawer. Sarah holding newborn Isla, her smile bright with the kind of joy that came from not knowing what was coming, from believing in futures that would never arrive. He held it for a long moment, feeling the familiar ache that had softened over time into something gentler. Not gone, never gone, but no longer sharp enough to cut. Diana appeared beside him, looking at the photograph without jealousy or insecurity. Do you miss her every day? But I'm not sad anymore. Carter set down the photograph carefully. She gave me Isla. Isla led me to you. You gave me a future. Do you think she'd approve? Diana's voice was soft, genuinely asking. I think she'd love you for loving us. They stood at the window watching Isla chase butterflies through a garden that was theirs, paid for by Diana's consulting work and Carter's handyman business that he'd restarted because sitting idle drove him crazy. The mansion money sat in trust funds and investments, but they lived on what they earned, and it felt right somehow. Honest, what do we do now? Diana's question echoed one from months ago in a different kitchen when everything had been contract and fear and walls too high to climb. We keep choosing each other every single day, forever and ever, forever and ever. The contract had expired 3 months ago. The legal document that had brought them together, that had outlined bedrooms and boundaries, and the careful distance between transaction and truth, it sat in a drawer somewhere irrelevant now, except as evidence of how far they'd traveled. But the love that was just beginning, growing like Isla, like Diana's courage, like the family they were building from pieces that had once been broken, but fit together better than anything whole. In the garden, Isla caught a butterfly, purple iridescent, its wings beating slowly against her careful palms. She looked up at the window where her parents stood, watching her smile wide enough to crack the world open. Can I keep it? Her voice carried through the open door. Diana called back without hesitation. Butterflies don't like to be kept, sweetheart. They need to fly free. But I want it to stay forever. You can keep it in your heart. That's where the most important things live. The things that matter so much that no cage could ever hold them. Isla considered this with the gravity only children could muster. Then she opened her hands and watched the butterfly flutter away into the afternoon sun. That's where I keep Mommy. In my heart. Carter's throat tightened. I'll keep the butterfly there too. And I'll keep you and Diana there so I never lose any of you. Diana's hand found Carter's, and they stood together, watching their daughter discover truths about love and loss and the way hearts could hold infinite things without ever feeling crowded. The story that had started with a signature on a contract, with desperation and transaction, and walls built so high they blocked out the sun, had become something neither of them had imagined possible. A family, not because paperwork said so, but because they'd chosen it. Every morning, every difficulty, every moment when running would have been easier than staying. They'd chosen each other, and they kept choosing. And that Carter thought watching Diana smile at something Isla was doing with a flower was the only contract that mattered anymore.